The orphan children and for all the refugees,
the disappeared and the bombing victims don't get ratings on TV.
Contra los armaguerras, contra las discriminaciones, contra los violadores, contra las malas vibras. We are all in this together, brothers and sisters, we can do better. Raise your voices to the sky, the price of silence is much too high. We said no to the war.
Hi, I'm Tanya Koken. I've been the program manager of the U.S. Human Rights Fund, which is convening this conference. We are funders of human rights in the United States. We see an incredible energy around using the human rights framework in the U.S., and we know that there are activists all over the world who have deep experience as human rights activists, and that experience very much needs to be shared here in the U.S. So really the goal of this conference is to allow activists working on similar issues to share strategies, to share lessons learned, and to really forge a more transnational movement for human rights.
What's happened in the Gulf region can happen to you too in the event of a disaster, because right now the law that we have, the Robert T. Stafford Disaster Relief Emergency Assistance Act, at times of a national disaster, all federal responses are at the discretion of whoever's in the White House. But at the same time, it's our government that goes abroad and talks about the guiding principles on internal displacement and the fact that other countries should be adopting these principles as part of their law. We should be demanding that here in the United States with a specific focus on what's happening in the Gulf region.
Torn to down, lost my childhood. Was it really God's plan?
We're not just interested in human rights for their own sake, but we want to take them outside of the abstract legal realm and give them practical meaning by translating them into living, breathing tools that organizations can use.
To me, has been shown to be the most important, is to have this sort of growing cadre of people who are committed to stake and stay. And this is, I think, our greatest accomplishment. We have built this growing cadre of people, activists, lawyers, our supporters, our donors, who have committed to stake and stay. We finally said we're going to be in this for the long haul until every person in the United States has their full range of human rights. And that, not which specific strategy, not which wall we scale, which move, that, I think, is where our success will lie.
More than anything, I think we always need to reflect on ourselves and whether or not we're doing the most possible in the advancement of human rights. I think we always need to take stock and hold ourselves accountable to where we can do things better.
NGOs and unions in sending countries are really interested in holding home countries accountable. And so, for example, we're doing a lot of binational work with India. And we're organizing Indian guest workers who came to the Gulf Coast. But we have 3 organizers in India. And through the campaign, and it's been really fascinating because it's been a relatively small number of workers, but through the campaign, every major party-affiliated trade association, trade union, and the major independent trade unions have all come on board.
It would be a fantastic strategic opportunity to build these bridges internationally amongst, I mean, obviously we know that there are allies in some parts of the Mexican government vis-a-vis the request for the advisory opinion post-Hoffman. We know that there are allies in the Indian government vis-a-vis the parliamentarians that came here. We have some other allies in the Algerian government, other governments who we've been in contact with. And when the U.S. comes up for review, not only do U.S.-based NGOs have an opportunity to have interventions, but people from sending countries, NGOs, members of parliament, other people. I mean, if you are a citizen of another country and you're an immigrant in the United States, that other country is still responsible for your well-being to some degree. So it's a real opportunity to have everybody's voice at the table when this review happens. And I think it's another incentive for us to really try to think strategically globally.
In the aftermath of Katrina, human rights is the fundamental way that we see all the work that we do. I think this kind of a meeting is really important, especially to be held here, because I think this is one of the greatest human rights disasters the United States has ever seen, and I think there's a lot that people around the world can learn and do to support the work that we're trying to do here. While people are trying to survive, they're also trying to rebuild and thrive. And without the human rights support of global advocates, the work is harder.
And so part of the initial campaign that we got involved in was to give the face to the disease. And there was getting people living with HIV themselves to talk about the issue and say, I'm sorry, I'm living with HIV, but also designing t-shirts like this one. And people wanted to ask questions, and so it began to create an environment where, you know, the mere fact that you have the t-shirt would push somebody to come to you and ask you a question and engage you on the issue of HIV per se, but it annoyed the ANC government to the extreme because there was no HIV, there was no crisis in South Africa, there were many other issues that we needed to focus on, but HIV was not one of them. And so the annoyance over a period of 10 years has brought us to a point where we are today, where we've got about 500,000 people who are on treatment. We have an expanded program of prevention of mother-to-child.
This is a very important gathering. It's part of the process of building relationships across organizations, across issues, across geography, as we move toward building a viable, in fact dynamic, domestic human rights movement. It's important to come together to hear other experiences, especially those individuals and organizations from outside of the U.S., to compare notes, to learn from one another, and to fellowship.
For the blacks, imagine if there was a genocide in Spain or somewhere in Bahrain.
The United States is the only country in the world that sentences children to life without parole. There is currently, our 2008 Human Rights Watch report found that 2,484 children throughout the country were serving this sentence. So almost 3,000 in the United States, 0 in the rest of the world. Louisiana has the dubious distinction of being the state with the highest rate of children serving life without parole sentences. And I really do say that us being able to claim this as a human rights issue is going to be the critical linchpin to whether we get success or not.
The majority of the homeless people live in downtown were former public housing residents.
The majority of them was public housing residents. And they came back to the city and didn't have no place to go because this place was locked off. And people didn't have anywhere to live. They slept in cars, they slept under the bridges until that homeless camp was formed. When the homeless camp was formed, we had tents for the families to be able to survive.
And then they tried to pass a law saying you couldn't camp on the streets.
They passed our mayor done that because he didn't want to see the large influx of people here in the city during the tourist time, you know? Because they had a lot of excitement coming on here in the city. They didn't want the folks from out of town to see how the city was treating the poor.
So we have a group of human rights institutions met in Paris in '91 and adopted a number of principles of what a national human rights institution should look like. And these were subsequently endorsed by the UN Human Rights Commission and then after that by the UN General Assembly. So this, I think, you'll find, if you look at the Paris principles, you'll find that they provide a really nice kind of framework for what you can insist is your entitlement to an adequate human rights institution at the national level.
We'd also like to see the Obama administration strengthen and transform the Civil Rights Commission into a full-scale Civil and Human Rights Commission, the way other countries have human rights commissions. So a more independent monitoring body that can hold government accountable, that can keep it honest.
Well, the human rights framework has kind of gotten away from its roots, I think, and it's really important to come back to its birthplace, which I think is the southern U.S., and I think it's super important to really root the international, global human rights movement to the movement here for liberation. And I think that's one of the reasons why it's so important.